right, thank you. Good evening. Today is Tuesday, November 15th, 2022, and I am calling this meeting of the Policy Committee of the National Board of Education to order. With us this evening, we have Ms. Darling.
Here.
Ms. Johnson.
Present.
And Mr. Poska.
Present.
And myself, Ms. Raymond. And it is, did I write? Oh, it's 6, exactly. Hey, we did pretty good. Okay. So we have some things that we've been working on and some new things kind of blended together. So last month, or sorry, not last month, in September, we had talked about JCA and JEC. JCA was our change of class or school assignment policy, and JEC was the manifestation of hardship, educational hardship policy. What the state has done is to combine the two policies into one policy. And so as I'm looking around the state, most of the other districts have already kind of made this change. Some of it started a couple years ago, and then they finished it up last year. So if you look at the two policies, you'll see that JCA has a bunch of red lines and then a bunch of stuff added to it. And that's simply rewording the JCA part and adding the manifest educational hardship in with the changes to that policy that go along with state law, because they changed RSA 193.3 last year. I think I covered it. Mr. Poska?
That's exactly right, and that's kind of, I think, Ms. Johnson wanted some clarity about where this came from, and I think Ms. Raymond reached out to our legal counsel just to get clarification on where this all came about. So we are in alignment with NHSBA, and the reality is what just Ms. Raymond said is they just kind of rolled two policies into one for clarity and shorten it up.
Yep, I'm just looking at my notes from last time, and I had made a note that we had some questions about this policy in regards to internal changes. We had had a discussion about parents who wanted to change schools within the district versus parents who wanted to change schools like beyond the district. So for intra-district changes, like between us and Hudson, for example, that's what this policy covers. So it would be a family that, for whatever reason, feels that their student needs to change districts. They would go to the superintendent, have that conversation with the superintendent, and then the superintendent brings it to the board. And then the other superintendent has to bring it to that board as well. And then the boards make the decision. For changes within a district, that is not mandated by state law. So the legal advice I got was that that is an internal procedure, not a policy per se that would be dictated by state law. And the way that we've dealt with that here in Nashua is that it goes to the principals to decide. And Mr. Poska sat down with me and gave me a kind of an overview about how that works in general here in Nashua, and I was hoping he would share it with you guys as well.
Sure. So if there's a student who wanted to, let's say they were attending Fairgrounds Middle School, and for whatever reason they wanted to attend Elm Street Middle School, there's a variance policy that they can submit. It starts out at the building level with the principals. They make the determination, which goes to our Director of Student Services. Director of Student Services then either can approve it or deny it. If it's denied, it goes to the next level, which is to the Assistant Superintendent level. Based upon whatever decision is made at that level, if it is denied again, it then can be appealed to the superintendent. So there is a process in place within the district for those moves to be made.
And then what the advice I got from our legal department was that if it gets to that point and a parent is still not satisfied, so say it goes up to the superintendent and the parent is like, I really think that my child is not best served in this particular school and they need to be in a different school. Then policy KEB and KE, which is public complaints about school personnel, kicks in, and that's the policy that a parent would, or guardian, would follow to get it in front of the board. So once they've gone up the chain to the superintendent, if they still are unhappy with the response that they have gotten, at that point, they can write to the board president and request to meet with the board to have the board adjudicate the matter. And so that's how we get to that. I'm trying to think, the other thing that we had talked about was, limiting the amount of self-disclosure that families have to make to strangers. And that's kind of the point of this policy, is to make that disclosure to the superintendent and then let the superintendent give the board the information that they need instead of having the 9 of us questioning somebody, because we don't want to get into that. And I think we had a case recently that came in front of the board where we worked it out with an out-of-district situation. So that's kind of where we are. So at this point, I'm looking for...
I've got a question.
Yes.
I've got a question. In reviewing this earlier, if the superintendent does not find that this is in the best interest of the student, I have a question about the superintendent and the parents with the best interest of the student. I understand the superintendent might not feel, but the superintendent doesn't know that child like the parent knows that child. So I kind of have a problem with that.
Right, so that language about the superintendent and the parents and best interest comes directly from state law. So I would advise us not to mess with the language, because then we might be out of compliance with state law. However, we still have the KEB and the ability for a parent to say, I met with the superintendent, I went through all these steps, and I disagree with them, and the board, I would like you to have a hearing. And then after us, if we rule in a way that they don't like, they can go to the State Board of Education. So there is not an appeals process, but there is a process to bring it beyond the superintendent, but it has to go through the steps per state law.
And just to clarify, that is for both, kind of what Ms. Raymond alluded to earlier, the intra decisions and the inter decisions. So there's policies in place for both of those. So there is an appeal, and they can go bring it to the board level if necessary in both of those situations.
And frankly, I think based on the conversations that I've had with people at the state level and then also locally, it sounds like that this law was changed because sending students out of district costs money. It's a money issue. So we have to pay out of district tuition for a student to go to another school district, just like students coming from other districts into ours have to pay tuition, unless the superintendents can come up with some sort of an agreement, which sometimes happens, but sometimes doesn't.
I will say, just for the record, I went through the variance process recently, and I was denied my first time. My only complaint about the denial process and the appeals process was that it wasn't written out in the denial letter for me, what the next step would be to appeal. However, that is input that I gave at the time. I have no idea if it changed or not. My concern with this policy, though, is
That's very good feedback.
Meeting with Mario about the variance was, I found, actually way easier than having to come before the board and try to explain to a group of people my personal situation. So only having to disclose to one was definitely easier for me. But my concern with this is, I know you guys are saying it's only for out of district, but in quite a few places here, under procedure letter C, it says parent shall make specific requests that the student be reassigned to another class/grade within the same school, to another public school, public academy, blah, blah, blah. So it looks like in here we have some language that pertains specifically to moving within the school.
It is. I mean, generally, yes, this is a between districts policy, but if, for example, a parent or guardian felt that their student should skip 3rd or 4th grade because they are that advanced, this policy would cover that as well. So there is a system for that, because that's different than a variance between a school to school. I forgot about the skipping grades part, but yes, you're right.
I didn't even know about the skipping grades.
And generally, what we've had in the past in this district, when we have kids who are advanced, is we utilize VLAX. So we have a bunch of students at Bicentennial in the last few years who were taking above their grade level math. And then we've also had students who got bused from their home school, their neighborhood school, to the school that had the appropriate class. So there was a young lady who was taking like trigonometry in like 6th grade. And so she actually got bused to the appropriate high school and then back to her 6th grade for the classes that she wasn't particularly advanced in. So I don't know this from personal experience with my own kids. My kids are great, but
I hope that child joined the math club.
me too.
All right, so this is the process a parent would follow should they feel like their child isn't necessarily learning in a class due to like the teacher's teaching style.
No,
Or-
if they have an issue with a teacher, like for example, say that I'm dissatisfied with my daughter's, I don't know, Spanish teacher or whatever. She doesn't take Spanish, so it's a good example. And I wanted her to have the other Spanish teacher. My responsibility as a parent would be then to contact the principal, I mean, first the teacher, but then the principal and say, hey, I have an issue with this teacher. What can we do, parent and principal, to work this out? And then see what the principal says. And then if I'm not happy with that, then I go a step up to Mr. Poska. So there's a system in place for that already.
All right, thank you.
Yep. Okay. So I'm looking to have a motion to send this off to the full board. Actually, I'll just make the motion because that's faster and easier. So I move to send policy JCA as presented this evening to the full board.
Second.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Okay. Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
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 Okay. Thank you. All right, so that one is going to the board. So the next policy is JEC, which is the old manifestation of hardship policy, which has now been replicated in this one. So I move to rescind JEC as it's a duplicate at this point.
I'll second.
Oh.
Okay. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, great. All right, and so the next one is policy BEDH. And I know you'll all remember that we worked on this back in June. Since then, we've gotten some feedback from the state. We had updated this as a response to changes in state law. Those changes took effect on November the 6th, 2022. So we were like Johnny on the spot, ready to make the changes. But the state has asked that we change a couple of language things to make the policy more clear. The biggest change that they were asking for, two things. One was regarding using the phrase 30 minutes, because we put two 15-minute time periods, which meets the law and the legal requirement, and they're fine with that. But they wanted to say totaling 30 minutes, so that it's clear to everyone that there's a 30 total minutes. And then the other part was regarding some language about like guidelines for public speaking. And this isn't intended to provide some guidelines so that people understand that they're here for a business meeting and not a soapbox. So for example, we're here to do the business of the district, so if someone has a comment about the district, that is 100% allowed. But it's probably not the right venue for someone to come in and talk about their feelings on, I don't know, some religion or, you know, Easter or whatever the city's doing on something else. That's a city discussion. So we'd like to encourage people, as part of our policy to limit their comments to things that we can do something about. And then the other limit to comments is, of course, you have free speech to say whatever you feel is, your truth. You can say whatever your feelings are, but you can't make threats to people. So someone can come in and say, I think all the board members are morons and you should all resign, but they can't say, or else I will hurt you. That's where it crosses the line. And at that point, we're being asked to cut off comments and advise people that if you do stray into a threatening zone, that action could be taken to have you removed from the room. The School Board Association has a great training on this that they started offering about halfway through COVID that anybody can take who's on our board for free. You just have to contact Will, or they send out that monthly email with all the trainings coming up. You just have to sign up. And they really go through all of the legal nitty-gritty involved. It was an intense training. I've taken it twice now because I didn't feel like I got the whole thing the first time. So, and I have some comments from Ms. Brown, too, that she wanted addressed this evening. So I want to make sure that I don't forget those. While I pull those up, go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. I remember back, let me get my dates here. I got so many papers here, like always. This came before the Board of Aldermen.
This policy or something similar?
Something similar about I'm tired, comments, threatening. I don't think that anybody should threaten anybody.
No.
That's number one. That goes. But this was back around 9/14/2022 when the Board of Aldermen put through relative to public comments at committee, that was committee meetings, relative to public comments, that's what it was. They said no crude, vulgar, profanity, and obscene remarks are prohibited. Unfortunately, they didn't read what they told the public they couldn't do, that members of that board was attacking private citizens. My problem with this is, and I said to two members of that board who were sponsors on this, toughen up. We are elected officials here. I don't think anybody should be able to sit in the audience or get up to that microphone and say that they're going to injure us.
No, certainly not.
But if they want to call me a name or something, I don't have a problem with it, because like I said to them that night, by the time they get to these boards, they are angry. Mm-hmm. They're angry because somebody didn't listen to them in the city, or they're angry here because somebody in administration or a teacher, somebody did not listen to them about their children. It was a perfect example last year over the masks. Parents were getting up saying that kids had medical reasons, that children couldn't wear masks and nobody was listening to them, and everything was going on deaf ear through administration. Right. And we know that we can pull the tapes all we want and we can hear what happened here. They were angry because they felt that nobody was listening to them.
And people are certainly allowed to come and express their feelings.
Absolutely.
What they can't do is threaten. They can call us names all they want, but they also, under the new law 18974 that just went into effect on November 6th, they have to be careful with personally identifiable information when they're doing complaints. So they can't be like, and I hate Heather Raymond, the lunch lady, because of XYZ, and she's terrible and you should fire her. That has to go to the superintendent's office, and we're being asked, as part of that law, to say, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Can you please send that to the superintendent, or can you send us an email so that the whole public doesn't do this because you're violating labor laws?
Well, it's very simple to put that aside and say at the beginning of each meeting that when you're going to give your public comment, we cannot mention any personnel in the district.
Right, that's why it says here on number 9.
But I cannot go along with these comment periods again, what people cannot say during the comment period. I'd like to know, where did we ever get this 3-minute timer between the Board of Education and the Board of Aldermen?
I think it's in our policy. I don't know, it's been in there for a while. It's in one of the policies. It's in policy, not this one. Hold on, I gotta pull up Safari again so I can pull up my policies and procedures.
It seems like whatever the Board of Aldermen does, we kind of follow them. It's kind of follow the leader.
Yeah,
They put
I think
this-
it's been like that for a long time. So I believe it's under regular board meetings, BEA.
Just to throw my 2
Just for
cents.
the 3 minutes to answer that question, so.
I mean, you listen to them at the Board of Aldermen, they tell people, the constituents, you have 3 minutes, and they belabor a point for 10 minutes,
Right.
if
I mean,
not longer.
Do we do that, though, here at our meetings? I think when we had like 100 people wanting to speak, we've asked them to keep it, and we've used the timer in those circumstances. But I would say for the last calendar year, we haven't really had any issue with that. You know what I mean? We might have been like, can you wrap it up? But I feel like really for the last calendar year, we've said, okay, listen, we're running out of time for comments. Can we extend it? Our board always votes to extend. I know that there are meetings, the only time I've ever been at a meeting where we said, that's it, we're cutting off public comments, was about the riflery program. That was probably 3-4 years ago, and it was midnight. And we said, we need to cut it off, and we'll come back another day. And then we did. We scheduled another meeting and opened it up with public comments.
3 minutes, it's very hard when you're on the other side trying to express issues or concerns. It is, I mean, at least we don't have the time unlike the Board of Aldermen. It click, click,
yeah.
click, 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 clicks, you know. It's almost like beat the clock here. Can you get it all in?
Right. Do we have any,
I cannot support a lot of these changes in this policy. I think we did a lot. 6 of 2022, if there's something that the state says that we have to put in, that's one thing. But meeting disruptions, yeah, you could say we're going to stop the meeting until we can compose ourselves, but I just, you know, I've been a member of that public many a times, been upset at each board. I remember coming here with 3 superintendents ago, I think it was, asking a question to administrative personnel, and the superintendent cut me off and started giving me a hard time. Never even spoke to the man before in my life. Had no idea. I asked a question about something in the budget that had to do with a contract,
yep.
and I got chastised for it. But that's okay when it's on this side, and we chastise the people on that side. But when they're on that side and they're upset with us, and they speak out about it, it's not okay. Yes, things were at a height last year. Hopefully, we'll never come to that again. Hopefully, we will sit down as a board with parents and try to work things out. And if we have to have something, then we have to have a policy, because when there was no policy in place, there was nothing to judge anything on.
That's what this is, though. This is the policy that came out of that, based on the state law that came out of that. Because it wasn't just our district, it was national, but it was certainly across, you know, the entirety of New Hampshire.
I think we're missing the point, because we have a policy here, but last year when the parents were screaming, we had no policy. We had just motions, motion after motion after
Right.
motion, with nothing in there for parents that had kids with a medical issue or a religious issue, for them to have any voice. So that's why I'm saying, by the time they get to us, they are fuming, and we are elected, we work for them, but it seems like they're working for us, and we don't want to listen to them, and I'm just tired of that
Right.
already.
Ms. Raymond,
Yeah.
I've only been on the board for a short period of time, but during this time, and you know, we've had some really good feedback from the parents in the last few months, where you know, the parents were very respectful, and there was some good give and take from both the parents and the board, to the point that you know, we brought this back because there was some discrepancy about the 30 minutes. So this was a policy that previously been voted in. We wanted to clarify that was not, there was a total of 30 minutes as opposed to two 15-minute segments. But the purpose of this policy is just beyond this, is to maintain control and order so that the board can do its work. And I think continually what I've seen from this board is to allow, the participants here to make sure their voice is heard and their concerns are heard, so the board can make it a kind of an informed decision about the topics that are brought forth here. But I think to the point that this policy is, it allows the board to maintain some order so they can do their work.
Right, and I just want to reiterate that we're not here to relitigate arguments that have been had in the past. This is the reason that this particular policy came back to us was twofold. One, there's a new law that took effect on November 6th, and we have to make sure that it's in compliance with that new law, because it is not. That's what part of this red stuff is. Anything that says RSA 18974, that's the new law that just took effect. And two, the state specifically requested that we use the term no less than 30 minutes. So that I would strongly advocate that we keep those things in there that the state has requested and required of us. So.
And I get that, but everything else, because New Hampshire courts side with free speech. And I've got the cases here back from 2015.
I guess my question then is, instead of telling me all the cases in the past, why don't you tell me what specific language in here violates any of those cases? Because I've spoken to multiple attorneys and the state on this, and Tara has done that as well. And this is what the attorneys have come back with, as this is in compliance with state law and case law. So if you feel that something's not, I'm happy to bring it back and say this is the line that's giving us a hard time.
I don't mind leaving the bodily harm in there, but anything else that has to do with speech, I want gone, because they have the right to speak to us. They have the right to yell at us. So it would be number 6, defamatory statements. That comments threatening bodily harm, that has to stay in there.
People don't have the right to disrupt the official business of the board. That was very clearly litigated during COVID. That's law. And there's, hang on, the law, in fact, is RSA 644-2, disturbing the peace.
Just to throw my 2 cents in there, as much as I'm loving watching you guys volley back and forth, I never thought there would be a day where I would be more extreme than probably anyone else on the board, but when it comes to freedom of speech, I believe in freedom of speech. I believe in the right to use horrible language I disagree with. I believe in the right to threaten, if only because the real right there is that we have the right to call the police, and criminal threatening is against the law. We don't have the ability to determine if somebody is breaking the law or to prosecute. That's up to people above our pay grades. And I think that generally speaking, most people, if they come in here and they're screaming horrible things and they're using hate speech and violence and everything else, they will get publicly thrown up in their own circles, and it ends up mitigating itself. But as long as we constitutionally have the right of freedom of speech, we as board members shouldn't be trying to change anything.
So you have the right to freedom of speech and free assembly. That's out there. That's out there with your signs and yelling at the building.
And I believe we should have it in here.
You don't have one in a public meeting. So in a public meeting, there are rules under the disturbing the peace and interrupting a public meeting that there's state law that limits what you're allowed to do and not to do.
So if we feel somebody is breaking a state law, it is our job to excuse ourselves from the room and go call the police.
No.
We are not to uphold the law.
No, it's our job to create guidelines under a policy, and in fact, it's our requirement under RSA 18974 to have a policy that creates these guidelines. So that's like our legal requirement, and the whole thing about the policy committee is that our job is to make sure that the board is following state law and that the district is following state law. So if we're saying that, well, we think that this law is dumb or is too restrictive because we're telling people that if they make threats to us, we're going to call the police on them in black and white so they know before they get here.
But that's the law.
Right,
But that's the law anywhere you go.
but people were very shocked when that happened in the past, and so that has led to a requirement that we have a policy that lays it out very clearly for people who want to know, when I go to the meeting, what should I be expecting for public comments?
Then post it. Then post and say that we will not accept
We
threatening
can't post it if we don't have a policy.
So I don't have a problem with like a piece of paper that says speaking guidelines that we put up at the podium that says, hey, don't be a jerk.
We've tried it.
And then we need to be stricter about following the rules we have in place.
So here's my suggestion. My suggestion is that we send this to the board and let the board weigh in, one. And the second suggestion is that we require or request the board members to all take the training that is available to them on public comments so that we are all speaking from a place of having the information that we need to make the informed decision about the policy.
I'm not going to vote to send this to the full board. A matter of fact, I'm going to make a motion to table
Till when?
indefinitely.
I would say leave it in committee until at least we have had the opportunity to take the training and understand better.
All right, I will say to you guys, if we are out of compliance with the law, I don't know what that does to us. And if we table it indefinitely, that leaves us out of compliance with the new state law. And so we still have to follow the state law, even if it's not in our policy.
That's agreed.
Okay, so the motion is to table it indefinitely. It was made by Paula.
I'll second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm opposed. All right, so it's 2-1?
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't hear you, that's
Oh,
fine.
sorry.
Okay. All right, so that one's tabled, and I will follow up with our legal department and find out what to do about that, because I feel like we are being derelict in our duty.
Perhaps we could schedule a meeting, if you're open to it, with the three of us with legal, just
I'm
to-
only doing it if we all go to a training with
I mean, I would
a
love
lawyer.
that.
I mean, I'm happy to bring attorneys in to
Yep.
do that, but I am not going to have us sit around a table and argue with an attorney during their time. If
Yeah.
we want to invite an attorney to come to this meeting, or if we want to invite the two state attorneys to come down and teach us about it and then have a conversation, I'm okay with that. But I'm not okay with us sitting in a closed room where it's not something that is accessible to people.
No, I completely agree, and I love the idea of doing the training first.
Well,
And
why don't we just ask the attorney, what's the most important pieces of this policy? Pull it out, and then we can figure out the rest later.
All right, so,
I would say, I definitely, like, things like the changing it to 30 minutes, stuff
I
like
don't
that
have
is
a
such
problem.
like an easy check mark for me.
are you willing to
If you could highlight for me.
consider that motion and at least send, well, it doesn't matter, I guess. We'll just have the attorney come down. All right, so I'm just making a note to myself, so I remember what I said I was going to do, because then I won't forget it. So,
I write stuff down and I still forget it. I would love in the future to hear about y'all's opinions on creating a policy that dictates us board members taking regular training, like dictating how many trainings, kind of like CEUs for teachers and nurses.
yeah, I think we should. I think we have a resource, and it drives me crazy that we don't take advantage of it.
I'll be the first to say I should take advantage of it more because I love stuff like that, and I haven't thought to.
I have to take, in 2 years, 12 electives and 1 core class.
Yeah.
And I'm done with that already. I'm starting my new core classes 2
So,
weeks.
yeah, no, I think it would be great if we had some requirement for trainings. I know it's difficult, but a lot of them are in the evenings or on Zoom, which makes it easier. All right, so the next item on the list is JKAA, which is child restraint and seclusion. This policy was updated by, wait, hold on, I'm losing my train of thought. This one was, Ms. Bagley was working with the state on this, correct, Mr. Poska?
Yes, JKAA and JKAA-R, both are, New Hampshire Department of Education required us to update our restraint provisions. We've partnered with crisis prevention intervention for probably 15 years now. As part of the rules and regulations of the state, they're constantly being refined. The state did update these procedures, so our CPI updated their procedures, so JKAA reflects the updated restraint and seclusion laws that align with the Department of Education, along with what CPI is requiring us to do. And then JKAA-R indicates the forms that have to be completed as part of a restraint. So they go in kind of together, and that's what those two policies are all about.
And we're offering the CPI training and that leads to the CPI certification to all of our district employees who...
And we continue to follow up with that training with our staff, some of which occurred, has occurred before the school year and then during some of our time during the school day.
Okay. All right, so honestly, I didn't dig into this one a lot because it was state mandated by the Department of Education, and I don't really feel comfortable messing around with child restraint stuff because it's just something that I don't have a level of expertise in. What the State Department of Education sent down and what Ms. Bagley has sent over, I'm suggesting that we pass along. Go ahead. Oh, wait, first Ms. Darling and then...
No, she can go first.
Yeah. Ms. Johnson.
I guess my question is, no period of restraint of a student may exceed 30 minutes unless an assessment of the mental, emotional, and physical well-being of the student is being conducted by the principal or supervisory employee designated by the principal who is trained to conduct such assessments. Do we have a list of what that training, should we add the list of what that training is to make it so that they are qualified to make that call? Or my first thought is if my child were having an issue where he needed to be restrained, which unfortunately has happened,
Yep.
and as a parent, it's really hard because logically, the adults are doing what they need to keep your child safe and to keep themselves safe, and they have the right to do that. But at the same time, there's the question of, do our principals have the time, the energy, and the training? And if so, exactly what is the training and what is the determining factor of whether 30 minutes is too long or not long enough? I almost feel I wish that we had
It says 15
social
minutes
worker.
without the approval of the
Yeah.
principal or the designee, and then it can't be exceeding 30 minutes unless there's an actual assessment that has been done. So I'm hoping Mr. Poska can clue us in on who the people are who are allowed to do this, what the training is, and then piggybacking off of Ms. Darling's question, I know Manchester uses a crisis mobile team, if someone is having a mental health crisis, if it gets to this period of needing that assessment. Do we do that here in Nashua? I know that it's the
rapid response.
Mobile crisis unit.
Yeah,
we
Greater
sometimes
National
use-
Mental Health.
Correct, and I think to go back to Ms. Darling, there are teams in place in each of the building who are trained in this. During the course of some of these issues, there's constant communication about what's going on, not only between the adults, but with the student who's involved. Having been, previously having done some of these restraints, a 3-minute restraint can feel like 3 hours, and I think, a lot of these times, fortunately, I've never been part of a lengthy restraint. I think that might be, in maybe some, I'm sure it maybe has happened here, but I think a lot of it is this state law, so this does involve some, private facilities where it has to happen a little bit more in common. So at the school level, I think we're very fortunate that we're not talking about these lengthy restraints, but this is just the law.
Yeah.
So I think, in the school setting, when these do occur, they're very traumatic, not only for the student, but also for the staff. So as part of that process with CPI, there's also a big reflection period about what caused the issue, the antecedent, how are we going to address that going forward, and then reflect upon this not only for our own training, but for also how we can welcome that student back into the educational environment.
Is the training the CPI training, or is there some other form of training that staff go through?
It's part of the CPI training.
Okay, and then who are the designees in general in our buildings? Because I know it's going to
Certainly
differ
vary by
depending
school,
on
but you're
what.
talking, probably some of the administrative staff, principal or assistant principal, and then you're talking about probably some of the special educators in the self-contained setting. Now, I'm painting with a broad brush there, and it might vary a little bit by school, but gives you an idea about who may be asked to complete and participate in some of that training.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Ms. Darling?
It does. I would only recommend, and this would be more procedurally, and I'm sure that the admins already have it in place because we have wonderful admins, making sure that if a child is being monitored or if they are being restrained, that there are at least 2 individuals whenever it is not an active emergency situation, just because I have seen cases of, the child right after is saying, I was squeezed, I was held down, I was pushed against a wall. Reactive statements that aren't necessarily as extreme as it's first sounding. So just having somebody there to act as witness whenever possible, I feel like is in the staff's best interest.
And that is part of the CPI recommended training,
Awesome.
that we have bystanders there, timing, communicating, because you're in the midst of it, like I said, when you're in the midst of some type of restraint, those 3 minutes go by hours.
5-year-olds are crazy strong.
Yes, they are.
It's insane.
Especially if they're in a crisis, right? Your fight or
Exactly.
flight
The
comes
fight or
in.
flight mode, that's exactly right.
Okay, and then Ms. Johnson had a question, and I just wanted to follow up on the mobile crisis team. So are we using them?
Oh, I'm sorry. When necessary, yes. There are times when we do call in those, depending upon the types of situation. Obviously, we're getting, that's when it's escalating to another point. Again, a restraint is a last, we're doing everything we can to avoid going to restraint, which sometimes involves, calling mobile crisis. Sometimes the challenge with mobile crisis is the time of the response.
Right.
So sometimes it's not always as quick as we would like, based upon their schedule. So now we're utilizing other members of our team to help support the student and staff who are on crisis.
All right, thank you. I know I'm jumping ahead with mobile crisis because I'm thinking the next step when this doesn't work and a kid
Yeah.
needs to be seen professionally outside of the school, and I'm thinking about the wait times in the ERs and the backlog of kids who end up stuck in the ER for days. And I know that's beyond the scope of this policy, but it triggered that cascade of thought in my head. Ms. Johnson?
Please explain when the student has to go into seclusion, where do they usually take the student to?
Again, it varies by school. Some schools have a seclusion room in place. Again, it's probably more in line with one of our self-contained programs who have it, I'm going to say, built into their classroom or built into the areas around their classroom, so that students and staff can access it rather easily.
So,
Like Broad Street School
so
has.
Broad Street School has some. Dr. Crisp
does.
has some. They have this great calm down room in Dr. Crisp that has a
The
bunch of
Cloud Run.
different stations of activities for kids to learn some
R&R.
self-regulation. Maine Dunstable has some, and I think Birch Hill has one too, although I haven't seen the one at Birch Hill, but I've seen the other ones.
Yeah, because I didn't get to visit all the schools because we were only allowed to go to certain schools, and then COVID hit.
Yeah, and then it kind of fell off, but I know that's something Dr. Andrade is working on.
The reason I'm asking, because I remember when we were in Broad Street School, there was a couple kids in different seclusion rooms.
I have.
And when I was there, and it,
When you were there, was the teacher right in the doorway? Because when I went, the teacher was literally standing in the doorway. And there was one kid who was trying to climb the walls, and I thought,
don't
I
think
could
so.
never do that.
I don't remember because it's 2.5, 3 years ago. That's what I, want to know, because it says here it won't be for punishment. But when you separate a child sometimes, then.
I can give you an personal example of a time that seclusion has been used. When a friend of mine's child was very, very young. They were going through a lot of stuff, a lot of big feelings. They started saying they were going to hurt themselves, hurt others. They were starting to lash out at other children. And it got to the point where the only safe location to put the child was in a room by themselves where they weren't able to hurt anybody. And I know I've seen the Dr. Crisprum, though neither of my children have had to use it. Caden used to go in and play in there to regulate himself, but he never had to be put in for seclusion.
I would go in there and hang out. Like, it's a great
The R&R room is really nice there. Like, I would go take naps there if I was allowed. But I will say, for the record, for anyone watching later, the law in New Hampshire limits restraint and seclusion to only emergency situations when no other intervention will prevent the substantial and imminent risk of seriously bodily harm to the child or someone else. And I know, a friend of mine's autistic son does headbanging.
Yeah.
And so restraining him is often a matter of keeping him from hitting his head into a doorway. Much rather hit into somebody's body.
Yeah. Do we, and this is a kind of an aside, do we have situations where we evacuate the room instead of evacuating the child? So I've
Dr. Crisp does.
I know of students who get, especially in the younger grades, who get very frustrated or enraged, and they'll start like throwing things and making things unsafe for their fellow students. Or do we have systems in place to try and do that as opposed to removing the child from the room? Because I could see how that could be
Yes.
dangerous to try and intervene with a kid in the middle of a meltdown.
It's exactly right. It means and sometimes that we have to remove others from the room rather than the student, and give that student the opportunity to decompress from the room and without everyone there. And again, it's for Ms. Darling referred to the safety issue. It's safety and also for their decency, and we try to understand what's going on and let them have their moment to work some things out so we can they're obviously dysregulated at the time. We want to regulate them and get them back on track.
Mm-hmm. And certainly don't want all the other kids staring at them while that happens. I mean, that's got to be uncomfortable for both the student in distress and everybody else that becomes distressed.
I feel like it would just escalate it. And I know that classrooms have been evacuated for both my boys at one point or another. So thank you, Dr. Crisp. You guys have impeccable procedures in place to keep your students safe, even when it's from my own children.
Hey, kids get dysregulated. It's part of being kids. I mean, child development is not easy. So did we have other questions, Ms. Johnson? Okay. So on JKAA, I move that we send that one to the full board.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay. All right, and then JKAAR, did y'all have any questions about the changes to the form? Or do we want to just go ahead and send that one straight over?
You could send that over.
All right, so I move that we send JKAAR to the board for approval as well.
Second.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And so the next ones are some more finance and site selection policies. Oh, it's only one more, right?
Two.
Oh, two more, and the energy. So on site selection, this is really for purchasing properties in the city, kind of like we did with Franklin Street, but then as they did 25 years ago for the new middle school. It doesn't really affect Nashua all that often because we're beholden to the city, and the city usually has the property that we then purchase from them. But there are some updates. We haven't looked at this policy in 22 years, and some of the laws have changed. And so that's really what this reflects, is the legal changes over the last 22 years. And we've actually renamed support services, finance and operations. City planning is not the only department that gets affected by this. Sometimes there's zoning, and I don't know what other ones, building and maintenance, and all sorts of ones. So any questions or comments?
What has the board been doing for 22 years? But like, this hasn't been reviewed in 22 years. That's just a long time. Aren't we
So-
supposed to review every?
So the last time I was policy chair was 5 years ago. And at that time, most of the policies coming to policy were written personally by board members.
Oh.
As opposed to reviewing our existing policies, which isn't the best practice for being in compliance with the state law.
That makes sense.
We've really tried to shift it over the last 4 years to actually looking at our old policies. And I've been, Jen started last year, and I've continued it this year, looking at the oldest, like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? If it's a number policy, we haven't touched it in 15 or 20 years. So we're getting to them. But every month I meet with Mr. Poska and we go over what administration needs, like here are some legal updates that they're aware of. And then we look at the oldest ones and we kind of try and create a balanced agenda with the ones that haven't been looked at and then the ones that are time sensitive. It's fun.
I can imagine. I appreciate that you guys do that every week.
All right, any other questions about the policy?
Nope.
Nope, all right, so I move that we send policy FEE to the full board.
Second.
Okay. So, I'm sorry, FEE. I should write it down before I say it out loud, but, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and then we need to then rescind policy 12231 because otherwise we'll end up with FEE and 12231 in the book at the same time and they'll be dupes. So I move to rescind.
I second.
122. Yeah, 2231. Okay. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, and then it's not written down, but I'll have to do that with energy management as well. Oh, no, I won't. So the energy management conservation policy, I forgot who looked at this. Was it Dan? Mr. Donovan?
It was Mr. Donovan, Mr. Smith. This was also an older policy. Somehow it was a policy, but I think in the midst of it, I think what we've determined it's at best a procedure regarding energy conservation. So the recommendation is to rescind this as a policy and just keep as a best practice within our buildings.
Yep. So one of the issues with this as a policy is that we can't, our HR policies and our union contracts prevent us from taking any like corrective action about some of these. So yes, we should be shutting off lights and stuff, but we can't like write somebody up if they don't, which we really shouldn't be writing people up for that. That's really petty. So it was the suggestion of our fiscal team that we rescind 6310. Questions, comments? Go ahead, Ms. Johnson. Oh, I thought you were going to press for that. All right. All right, so I move to rescind.
Second.
6310. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Oh, aye for me too. 3-0. Okay. I see that we have a guest this evening. We don't typically have public comments. Did you have a public comment, sir? No. Okay. Right, so our guest does not have a public comment. I know we can't, it doesn't pick up on the tape unless you have a microphone. So I will leave him alone. I have, going forward, I know we said we are tabling BEDH, but I agreed that I would bring that up to the attorneys for training. And then ongoing, where's my list? Oh, no. Yes, ongoing. I have a request from a committee member to look at IGE, which is parental objections to specific course material. So I have asked Mr. Poska to pull that one out and bring it to Dr. Andrade. I've also been looking at what some of the other districts are doing and what around the state so that we can see what legal updates there are, if any. Let's see, my other note, was how the curriculum falls into JKA. IKF is on my list, which is an IKFR, which is core diploma. There have been some updates to the state requirements for the core diploma, and there's something about civics education that we have to make sure. So Mr. Poska was working on that.
Well, we should have, well, there's going to be something coming before the board regarding a science recommendation that came out of curriculum, along with the civics one that you alluded to. So if we can get everything in for December, we might have that for December, but at the latest, we'll probably have that as January.
Okay. So, and then I have, let's see, KB, is that right? KB, which is a Title I parent involvement. We've asked Title I to take a look at that, just to see. Is that right? Am I wrong?
I thought we looked at KB in September.
Oh, I don't know. I have a note.
Like KEB, or is there a difference?
There's KE and KEB, which is the complaints. And then I thought there was a Title I. Oh, did she look at it and find no changes?
Because we found no changes.
All right,
yes.
then I'll cross that off my list. And then I have some D policies, which are, I think they're financial things. Let me pull them up. Yeah, some D policies that I have asked finance to take a look at under audits and what's the other one? Fiscal accounting and reporting regulations to see what those look like. I don't know if they'll be ready for December or if it'll be early next year for whomever is policy chair next year. But those are the ones that I have in the pike, plus whatever old ones and whatever admin brings to me. Did you all have anything else that you had caught your eye or wanted us to address? And I don't mean to put you on the spot. You can always email me.
I don't have anything quite at the moment.
Okay. All right. And then I know that there's some changes to statewide assessments. We have a policy for that that is kind of in the pike too, kind of a little bit further out. So we'll keep moving on and moving forward.
Sounds good.
All right. So that is really all I had for now.
I love when I tell my babysitter it's going to be a late night, and it's not. Thank you.
Sorry, I
Don't
used
do
to fill
not
up the full 90 minutes
apologize.
every time, and I can do that again. I think it's just with the new administration and where we are in our policy queue, some things need more work behind the scenes before they're ready to come to us.
Yeah.
And some things are just legal, like when laws change, there's not a lot we can quibble about. So I'll try not to overload us for December either, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so in that case, I am happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. All in favor of adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, so we are adjourned at 6:57 PM. Thank you, everybody.